I took the Art Dealer Diaries on a little road trip this week to northeastern Oklahoma, to Pawhuska, which is a city and really it's a town in the heart of Osage Country, to get an inside look at this blockbuster movie by Martin Scorsese, which is Killers of the Flower Moon. The book was by David Grann. And the story is a tragic time for the Osage. And in fact, by the Osage, they call it the Reign of Terror, and it takes place from around 1921 to 1926, where at least 25 Osage were poisoned, shot, or blown up by this cadre of local white characters, which were all trying to cash into the oil boom which was taking place at the Osage Nation. The Osage themselves were owned the mineral rights, and those allotments were handed out to the members. There were 2,000 members that were identified as, Osage Indians. And for us, we were very fortunate to get to actually talk to an Osage woman, Billie Ponca. And we had a nice discussion at the place she works, which is the Waterbird Gallery, which is owned by Danette Daniels. And, to find out what it's like to be an Osage woman today, and about the movie, which she was part of. She was one of the backdrops for the movie, and she liked the movie. She saw it in Tulsa when they had a special opening, not only for the Osage people, but they had a lot of the stars literally showed up for this, which was a big deal and something that usually didn't happen. And she's very interesting, right? Her heritage is she's related to the last heritage Osage chief, which is Chief Whitehair, which the town gets its name from, which is Pawhuska. That was his native name. But also, by marriage, she is a relative of, her husband was a relative of Brian Burkhart, and whose brother, Ernest Burkhart, is played by Leonardo DiCaprio in the movie. So, we talk about a lot of things. She was born in Fairfax, Oklahoma, where part of the movie was shot. In fact, the movie, her house there was a backdrop for one of the big scenes where Rita Smith's house is blown up. And it was very interesting to get her take on what it's like to live in Pawhuska and Fairfax now, and the movie, and the process of how the movie. And, it was delightful. She was delightful. And hopefully this podcast will add this additional layer of how you see the movie, understand the movie from a native perspective.
My name is Billie Ponca, and I was born and raised in Fairfax, and that's where I live today.
And you're Osage.
I am Osage.
And you are related in this movie, Killers of the Flower Moon, to some of the people that were part of that whole component, right?
Yes, by marriage.
Yes, by marriage.
Yes. Brian Burkhart, after all this was over, he married my great aunt, Lily Morrell Burkhart. So I was his great niece by marriage.
And tell us who Brian Burkhart, for those who won't know.
Well, Brian Burkhart is the brother of Ernest Burkhart and the nephew of Bill Hale. And of course, Bill Hale was the mastermind of the Reign of Terror,
Right.
the Osage murders, and he had encouraged his nephews, Ernest and Brian, to come up. They were from Greenville, Texas, to come up and with him to Osage County. And then he encouraged Ernest to marry Molly. And then, of course, he did. And, excuse me, Brian wasn't married, but he was in kind of an on and off relationship with Anna. And the way the microfilm reads, the microfilm out to the Whitehair Memorial is called the Sanitation Records. And the way the microfilm reads is that Kelsey Morrison, excuse me, let me go back. It wasn't the Sanitation Records. The Sanitation Records talks about health. I'll get back to that in a minute. But in the microfilm, the way it reads is Kelsey Morrison and Brian Burkhart had Anna Brown in a car. Her last known place to be seen alive was in Ralston at the Opera House and bar area. And Brian Burkhart was loving Anna Brown in the back seat. They drove her 3 miles out of Fairfax, Kelsey Morrison opened up the door, knocked her in the head, and when she still showed signs of life, they drug her out of the car. And then Brian Burkhart held her, and Kelsey Morrison shot her.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's quite an involvement.
Yes.
But he was never prosecuted. He turned state's evidence against Kelsey Morrison. He did serve time in prison. He got caught transporting counterfeit money across state lines. And this is the story that the family has. I don't know if it's in any of the books like this.
Right.
But he was transporting this counterfeit money, and he had a flat. And just so happened, a patrolman came by, and this patrolman stopped to help him. And when he popped that hubcap, out fell this counterfeit money. And he later said that was pretty stupid of himself to put that in the hubcap. Anyway, that's my association with Mr. Burkhart. And that's how he married my aunt.
And the Burkhart, it was the brother to the man who ended up killing, being involved in blowing up the house, right, of Molly's sister.
Bill Hale
Yeah.
was the mastermind of all of it.
Right.
And after he had encouraged Ernest to marry Molly, then he started killing off all her relatives.
Yep.
And what really brought the federal government in it was they finally killed an Indian on federal land, and that was Henry Roan.
Right. They shot him to death too, right?
Yes, they did. And but one of the things that the government had no interest in this and did not send anyone here to investigate with any of the murders, and there was more.
Yeah, there's like 24 murders or something.
Well,
right?
I know. I have a list that states 25 that were uninvestigated,
Yeah.
But then there's more. There's
Yeah.
more. They don't really have an exact account of that. They just concentrate on this one family, the Lizzie Q family. But the tribe paid the government $10,000.
Right, and this is like 1921.
Yeah, so you
when they
equivalent
met.
that to the money today.
Right.
And it was the same thing with anything that the Osages did. You had an Osage price and you had a non-Osage price for things. To bury an Osage was exorbitant back then.
Yeah.
And when something happened, the funeral homes couldn't get there fast enough because they were the ones that was going to be benefiting from that.
Even though they couldn't control their own money, they had to have a white person generally be the distributor of all the funds, right?
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I had read that started, one of the things that when I do give talks, I like to tell them, Bill Hale had already become a very prosperous, wealthy man before he started killing for money.
Right.
And one of the things that I had read was that what really got him started was he had borrowed money from an Indian man had borrowed money from him. I don't know the exact, so let's say $50, because back then that's quite a bit of money. But when he turned it into the agency, he put 100 or 150.
Right.
And there was no checks and balances. There wasn't anything to prove him wrong.
Yeah, and he made a lot of his wealth off
that's kind of how it
insurance
started.
fraud.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. He had Henry Roan insured for $25,000.
Which was a fake insurance too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So now, as you growing up as a kid, did you know about all this? Was it talked about?
No. Well, there's, people ask that question a lot when I do talks also. And the only thing, because I've asked other families, and the only thing that makes any sense to any of us is that they didn't want to scare their children. So it wasn't really, in some homes it was talked about, some homes they just didn't talk about it. And as myself growing up, I was just only told that he did have a part in it, but it wasn't that much.
Being who was he had a part
Brian.
of it? Brian had a part of it.
And so then people, whenever I worked at the White Hare and lived out there for 18 and a half years. And people got to coming in doing research.
Yes.
Well, I didn't really know. So after we had got those FBI files, I started reading them. And that's when I looked him up and knew what had happened.
Yeah. And what did that make you feel like when you found that out?
Well, the only thing that I really felt at the time was that wasn't the person I knew.
Yes.
And so it was hard for me to see him in a light that brutal, cruel, and negative. Because the only thing I had ever seen was nice, gentle, giving man.
Right.
So yeah, but I will say this personally, I'm glad I didn't know it when he was living.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it would have tainted you.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
somewhat, yeah,
I'm sure it would not have been.
yeah. Had a little bit different viewpoint of it.
And so, do people still speak Osage? Is the language still
Yes, in
spoken?
fact, yes. When I worked at the White Hare years ago, we did a program with the language, but back then it was just as you heard it. When you said an Osage word, then the student would write it down the way it sounded to them. Like let's say money is Monzeska. And they would write that down so they could look at it and repeat it back to you. But since then, they have an orthography and they teach it in an orthography method. It's difficult for me. I've taken classes before and they've really tried, but I just have a hard time with those little symbols.
Right. So when you were growing up, you didn't. It wasn't spoken really in your family.
Well, no, I really wasn't raised with my Indian family, to be quite truthful. I was raised by non-Indians. But so I didn't really hear it as a child growing up. But when I was at the White Hare, Preston and Lenora Morrell, who were relatives of mine, came to the White Hare frequently to visit with my former boss at that time was Dr. Dan Swan. And you could hear them talking in Osage, conversing, and it's a beautiful language. You know, it was just so flowing. And I'd listen, I'd be in my office and I'd listen to him and I'd think, oh, how nice is that?
Yeah.
And then whenever Dan would come back or I would go in there, then they would stop and talk English. Yeah, I had a teacher one time, because they would ask her questions, and her name was Hazel Harper. And she was a fluent Osage speaker, and she had grew up in a home with Osage speakers. And they would ask her something, and she'd look at him and she'd say, I didn't make the language. But what she said was probably the hardest for a person was because they were thinking in Osage, and they would have to translate into English. Well, it's just the opposite for us now. We think in English and then try to translate it into Osage.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah.
And so Pawhuska still. How many Osage tribal members are there still that live in Pawhuska or in this region?
I don't truthfully know how many live in the area. That would be a question for the cultural center from the tribe. But I do know worldwide and abroad there's over 20 to 25,000 of us. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
a lot of us. Yeah.
And so, how has this movie, Killers of the Flower Moon, changed the community, or has it?
Well, I think it's really made the non-Indian community very much aware.
Yeah,
you
finally.
know, yeah, over 100 years. But in the Indian community, for the most part, what I've heard is that they're glad it's out there. They're glad it's finally being told. There are some, very few that I've heard, and just visiting, that didn't want any part of it. Didn't want to be a part of the what would you say, the tragicness of it.
Yes.
And they didn't want to be exploited in that way.
Yes.
Now, that, of course, everyone's entitled to their opinion, but whenever I worked at the White Hare, they had a movie out called The FBI Story with James Stewart.
Mm-hmm. That was an old one.
Yeah,
Great movie,
yeah,
actually.
yeah. But there's a little small segment in there, and it talks about the Osage murders, but it calls it Wade County instead of Osage County. And instead of calling him Bill Hale, they call him McCutcheon. But then some of the other names were correct. And whenever I would give lectures on the murders, I would pull that film out and stop it and start it and stop it and start it, and then we would talk about that a little bit. Now, before long, they'll be able to have a DVD and watch the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I, for one, think it's wonderful as a teaching tool. And some of the talks I'm giving right now over at the Marlin Grand House, I've had some teachers come up to me and say that, that they want to start teaching it in their class.
Yeah, the history.
Yeah. Well, Oklahoma really doesn't care for that. Our governor doesn't really care for, like, the Tulsa race riots and the murders and things. But there is a youth book out too, The Killers of the Flower Moon, and it's geared for younger people.
Is that a David Grann?
Yes. Yes, from what I understand, David Grann asked his young daughter if she knew, let's say, what a bootlegger was, and she did not. And that he put a glossary in it. And I think it's just some, because I've looked at it and compared it to the other book, and the only thing that I've noticed is maybe one picture. I don't think more than two is not in there, and then some of the wordage isn't as descriptive as in the other book.
And so the movie was shot here, right?
It was shot mainly in Osage County here in Oklahoma, and it was shot mainly in Pawhuska, Ralston, and Gray Horse areas.
Gray Horse.
Fairfax.
And you grew up in
Fairfax.
right here, yeah, your whole life.
Well, I lived away through the years. I've lived in Santa Fe and I've lived in Tulsa years ago, but I moved back to Fairfax in '82, and I've been there ever since.
But you were born in
Yes.
this area. Yeah. So you're a native.
I'm a native.
And you know a
And
lot.
I like it. Well, I don't know about that, but I've heard a lot.
Right, I bet you've heard a lot. And you must know, are the Hales family still around this area at all?
I don't know that the Hales family is still in this area, but I'm sure there are still descendants. Because if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Grann was visiting here, because he'll come and sign books for Danette. And he said he was doing a book signing and a talk somewhere, and a lady came up to him and said he was one of Bill Hale's nieces or Ernest's nieces. I'm not sure. I think it was Bill Hale. And then he just said to her, well, we can't help who our family is.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean,
But there's definitely still members of the Burkhart family in the areas.
Yes, including you.
Well, I mean, blood relatives.
Yeah,
there
blood
are.
relatives, yeah.
There are, yeah. I think it was pretty devastating for the families back then. And, when they did this movie, they really, really did a lot of extensive research. I know they went to Smithsonian and took copies of the pictures of the early day Osages in that time period. And I was in the background. There was 400 of us background people. And I know whenever you went in to get your hair and your makeup and your clothes, the room was just full of early day Osage pictures.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah. And then...
And so you were in as an extra?
Background.
Yeah. So I can look in the movie when it comes out, I'll look for you?
You can see my house. My house is in there, so
Is
about
it?
there, and I do. Yeah.
Is that in here or in Fairfax?
Fairfax.
Yes.
In the blown-up scene, my house is right across the street. It's a greenhouse, and they come and strung lights in the yard, and they even come over, and I have a big 2-car garage, and they put what they call a plug in front of that garage where it looks like there's a door and windows.
Yeah.
And they came over and put lamps in the windows and curtains on the windows, and that shows up in the movie.
It must have been an odd feeling to have all the Model Ts, and they redid the, downtown. They put dirt on the roads, right? And
well, they used kahika. They didn't really do that. The main portion of that film is right down here on kahika. They put dirt on there, and you can still go by now and see some of the writings on the windows, like the early day writings, like so and so's candy store or grocery store or something like that.
But did you feel like you were in a time warp?
I felt like I was in the hot sun. It was in the summertime.
Yeah.
And they had like four layers of clothes on you.
Yes.
And it was over 100 degrees, not counting the heat index.
Yeah.
But it was pretty interesting to be a part and see it. And the clothes, and one of my heroes was the if I can think of his name real quick, the set designer. He's the husband of Ceci Spesic. I'll think of his name in a minute. Anyway, just watching him work and create and make all this happen in that time period was just amazing to me.
And they all had their Pendleton blankets on, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that had to be something too, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure you probably had a few in your own family.
I did, yes, and that. And one of the nice things about it too was, on set, even though there were so many people, there was a lot of relatives that you've seen be a part of it with you.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of like when they showed the movie for us in Tulsa.
Oh, you've seen the movie?
Yeah. It was in Tulsa.
Did you like it?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
In Tulsa, they took the Gray Horse community, the elders and others, and took us to Tulsa, treated us to the movie, and we all got to see it together. And I think that was what was really nice.
There had to be a lot of tears that were in that theater.
It is emotional
Yes.
on some levels. And then, I just found this out just recently. I wondered because in the movie it shows a game that's being played, and I thought, I hadn't heard much about that. But they found a lady who's Osage, who her great-grandmother had taken home movies. And Mr. Scorsese borrowed those home movies and put those scenes in
the
this
movie.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the other thing that I like to tell people is that the cultural advisor on the movie's name was John Williams. He's from Grey Horse, and he was the cultural advisor, and everything is pretty much spot on.
Wow.
And they dedicated the movie to him because he has since passed away.
Oh, wow.
He did get to see the movie, though.
Yeah.
But one of the things that was being said one time, I don't remember what it was actually about, but they were talking on set, and they said, well, I don't know if that's quite right, or you think they ought to do that? And someone said, Mr. Scorsese is spending $200 million plus. If he wants it, it's going to be in there.
Yeah, I mean, he did. They were very careful about getting the costumes right, the blankets right, having lots of extras that were from, Osage and Native voices in it.
Yeah, it was quite an experience. I will tell you this: if you're going to be in the movies, you want to be one of the stars, though.
Treated a little differently.
Well, you had access to air conditioners
there you go.
and cars.
So, did you get to see any or meet any of DiCaprio or?
I did.
De Niro, or?
I got to. I actually got to talk to Mr. DiCaprio, not on the phone because. They knew that my association with Mr. Burkhart.
Yes.
And so I did get to visit with him on the phone. I'd see him on set, and I could have just reached out and touched him, but you aren't supposed to.
Yeah.
And so I kept saying to one, I talked to you on the phone. I talked to you on the phone.
And do you think he got a little sense of the family lineage?
Definitely. I think they all did. I think Lily Gladstone and especially Mr. DiCaprio, I think they really got a sense of who we were, how we felt, because, in the beginning, that was going to be more of a story about the FBI.
Right.
And then the community got together and sent a letter to Mr. Scorsese and asked him to come, treat him to a meal, and visit with him about the movie. And after that happened, I'm not sure, but what I heard was that Leonardo was the one that said, maybe we should kind of take another look at this. And I think that's when it shifted over to more of the Osage story. Of course, the FBI is important, but I think that's when it kind of shifted. And I also heard this too, that day that they took all of us to the movie in Tulsa. The actors were all there, the ones that could make it. Mr. De Niro, I think, had just lost a grandson. He wasn't there. But the actors were there, and I heard that Apple said that was the first time in the history that they knew that the actors went to a premiere like that.
Yeah.
And was asked why they did that. And they said that was because the Osage people were so good to them.
Respect.
Yeah. Yeah. On set, if anyone showed disrespect to the Osages or any of the other people, they were gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Especially if there was any kind of racism or anything like that, they were gone.
So it sounds like it was a good experience.
It was a very good experience. I'm really, really happy and just feel privileged that I got to be a part of it.
Yes.
And I would probably had my feelings hurt had I not been chosen. But it was rough.
Yeah, just environmentally
just
it was hard.
Heat.
Yeah, I heard that.
I was on set 33 days.
Oh, wow.
And that heat was excruciating.
Yeah, June, right?
And they tried,
Yeah.
They tried, in June and July and even into August.
Yeah.
They tried to make you as comfortable as possible.
Yeah.
But whenever you're wearing, about 4 layers of clothes,
Yes.
and sometimes a shawl over you, and you're out in the heat.
Yeah.
And that was during COVID.
Yeah, right.
So it was mask on, mask off,
Yeah,
mask on, mask
right.
off, and those masks are hot.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
have a feeling you kind of felt there was a responsibility for you to do it, though.
Well, I did as an Osage
Right.
person,
Yes.
woman, as a mother, a grandmother, and a great grandmother.
Yes.
I just feel like it was important that the story be told,
Yes.
and I just feel very privileged to have been a part of it.
Yeah. Well, that's just fantastic. Thank you
Yeah.
so
Oh, well,
much
you're
for
welcome.
taking the time
Oh, I
today
don't.
to.
I never know why anybody wants me to start talking, but
Yeah.
I'm always surprised.
Well, you're part of history.
Yeah.
You are part of
Yeah.
history. And I
Well,
have a feeling that Pawhuska is going to get a lot more people coming
Yeah.
in to see the city,
Yeah.
which is great for them. It's,
I think the whole little area, Fairfax and Pawhuska, there's, well, the only thing I know the cities are trying, I know Fairfax is trying to do things to promote it and have something for them to see. But there really isn't any guide as to where the murders happened.
right.
Now they may do that. I don't know what their plans
Yes.
are. But out to the cemetery, they've had to put up a larger fence, and it's automated, and it says no trespassing
Yes.
it's federal property. So I think they just didn't want people coming and trying to do something to the grave sites.
Right.
'Cause, people have shot the pictures out for years. And
Right.
in fact, a program a few years ago, the museum had a program to go back out and refurbish the pictures and someone's already tried to shoot them out again. So,
And you think that's racism?
Oh,
that's
sure
going
it
on?
is, yeah.
Do you feel
of
that still
course.
here in this area?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, it's
May I
interesting.
tell you one more story?
Yeah, sure, of course.
Whenever they were picking the places to shoot, the set designer went to a place in Fairfax where he knew that had been used at the time by these people that were in the movie. And the persons in this conversation with them, the person said, well, they didn't have it that bad. They got what they deserved.
Oh, my God.
That was during the making of this movie.
Wow.
So no, their building was not used.
Yeah, yeah. And it's still,
Oh, it's still there, yeah.
Yeah, I guess you see
Yeah,
that.
it's still there.
I try not to think that
Yeah.
exists because
Yeah.
I spend so much time with Native Americans that are my friends and artists and things that it's a little shocking even when I hear it, but it's, it's the way it is.
And one of the things that I usually end up my talks with is that we're still here.
Yeah,
We're a resilient people.
yeah,
And we're going to be here.
yeah.
And we're going to stay here.
Yeah, I believe it.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you a question about
Sure.
that courthouse that's just up above. You can see it when you walk
Yeah.
out. And so that must have been a landmark always in this town, right?
That was where they were taken
Yeah,
to.
and that's where
Yeah.
Hale was.
Hale and Ern, all of them. That's
All
where
of them,
they all
right?
were taken, yes.
Yeah, and found guilty ultimately,
Yes,
right
yes.
there.
Ernest only spent 22 years of a 99-year sentence.
Right.
And in prison, his duties was to drive officials around,
Yeah.
dignitaries.
Right, and he was in the prison that White,
Leavenworth.
right, actually was the FBI agent
Yeah.
who had put him in that jail,
Exactly.
along with Hale, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
So do you look at that occasionally, that courthouse, and
Yeah.
think about things?
Oh, and whenever I've gone into it, that's where you go, your county assessor and everybody's in there and pay your taxes and
Right.
things, not your taxes now, but you go in. Yeah, I just look at those walls and I think, my goodness, if these things could talk.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah.
And has the oil kind of played out in this region, or is it still an
Well, of course,
important component of the
well,
economy?
it's still important, of course, and we still do have oil here. But it's not near as prevalent as it was back then. And there are a lot of Osages, that do not have any portion of a head right and do not own any land. Several years ago, I'm going to say 10%, but I really think it's 5%. Osages own less than 10% of the land now. Listen to that interest, you'll like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's shocking, really. Yeah, your land.
So, the tribe does do a lot for the programs like the youth and the elderly and the schools. But one of our main sources of revenue now is our casinos.
Yes,
Yeah,
good for you.
yeah.
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 A new oil, but this time you get to control it.
Yeah. And I tell people too, they ask about the future of the tribe.
Yes.
And one of the things that the tribe does is really promote education. And I think even they will help a Osage go through their first masters, but then after that they're kind of on their own. But we have a lot of very well educated people
Yes.
now, so we can kind of fight them on their own
Yes.
ground now.
Well, it looks like you're fighting them well. Well, thank you so much. I
Oh, you're
really
welcome.
appreciate you
You're
taking the time to
welcome.
be on my program. And
Well, thank you for asking me.
yes, no, coming to Pawhuska, this will be maybe the highlight of my entire trip, and it's a long trip.
You're so nice, and
thank you so much.
Well,
that
thank
was
you,
wonderful.
Sir. Well,
and
I hope
you got
so.
all your Santa Fe kind of stuff on too.
Well, I just take days. I just got to have it everywhere, and then other days I don't wear it at all.
Yeah, well, you picked the right day to have it all on. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I hope that you enjoyed that.
Oh, it's fantastic. You kidding me?
Okay. I'm trying to think of that gentleman's name because I just really admire him.
The designer?
Set designer.
Yeah, we'll look it up and make sure that we.
And he did the Revelant too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but he's really good.
Yeah.
So look his name up.
Yeah, the funny thing is the Revelant was, about the Rocky Mountain Fur Trading Company, which is actually my family.
Is it really?
Yeah.
And he, I think he's even won some kind of awards. But I got to visit with him quite a bit because he painted my house, and then he came in here.
Yes. Did they paint the whole house? Or
Yeah.
Yeah. Because
the
I saw
whole
some of them,
thing.
they just painted like a side.
No, he painted the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you got a free paint thing out of it.
And put that plug up.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one more little story.
Yeah,
You're going to like
yeah.
this. This doesn't have to be on there.
No.
When those cars first came to town.
Yeah, the Model Ts.
Yeah. And I thought, I just want to see one that really, really close. We drove, me and friends, we'd drive all over Pawhuska looking for them. Well, we found out where they were, but of course they had a guard there and you couldn't get in. So we just turned around, and came back. And then I'm at the house one morning and I heard this kind of ruckus outside, and they had already told me they were going to be filming.
Yes.
And could they use my this driveway over here? Mr. Scorsese parked his mobile thing, and Mr. Leonardo put his escalator, whatever that was, in front of it. And then they had a food truck right here. Well, my door's right here. And I thought, well, what's that noise? And I opened that door, and here's all these cars facing me, just like this.
All the Model Ts.
Because they use that driveway. I have a circle drive.
Right.
And I thought, and I'm in my house coat, and I'm looking. So that was weird.
Yeah.
When you open your
Hollywood
front
has come.
when you open your front door, and you're on set.
Yeah.
And I thought, because then I just kind of looked around, and there was, like I said, the food truck and Mr. DiCaprio's vehicle and Mr. Scorsese's air conditioned thing. And then right across the street is the explosion house.
Yes.
And then here's all these cars just looking at me.
Yeah.
I didn't have to go very far that day.
Well, it'll make going to the movie a new experience when I see it. I go, there's your house.
Yeah. There was quite a history lesson too, because I really didn't know why they had put those lights in their yards. It was because of fear. That way, if at night they could see who was in their yard.
I bet, because everyone was dying. Young people were dying.
And
and a lot of them.
That's right. But I will say this: when you're on set and you see all these different people and all their different jobs, I don't think anybody walked. Everybody was just
running.
Yeah. And it was just a very, very well-oiled machine.
Yes, I'm sure.
And it was just something, to see all that happening and going on. Yeah. I even got to ride in one of those cars.
In one of the old ones?
Yeah.
Yeah. How was it?
Hot.
Yeah. Everything's hot in Oklahoma.
Bumpy and dusty.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's good. Well, thank you again.
Oh,
I
you're
appreciate
welcome.
it, taking
You're
the time.
welcome. Thank you.